Hello, my dear curious and studious students of surgery. Myself, Dr. Mahesh Chaudhary. I am warm welcoming you in my surgery lecture series. This surgery lecture series contains entire surgery with anesthesia, with radiology, with orthopedic. So stay tuned with us. Let's start our surgery lecture series. Welcome, my dear students, in my surgery lecture number 115, that is the neck. In this lecture, we will explore the swelling in the neck region, midline and lateral swellings, acute and chronic swellings, branchial cyst, branchial fistula, and congenital branchial fistula. All these points are covered in this lecture. Let's start with the neck, the swelling in the neck. Swelling in the neck may be due to the various causes. These swellings, for ease of the description, can be divided into A. Midline swelling and B. Lateral swelling. First, we will see the midline swelling form above downwards, that is the Ludwig's angina, enlarged submental lymph nodes, sublingual dermoid, thyroglossal cyst, subhyoid bursitis, goiter of the thyroid isthmus and pyramidal lobe, enlarged lymph nodes and lipoma in the suprasternal space of Burns, retrosternal goiter, thymic swelling, bony swelling arising from the manubrium sterni. A few swellings may appear anywhere in the midline, which are swelling of the skin and superficial fascia, that is the sebaceous cyst, lipoma, fibroma, neurofibroma, and dermoid cyst. In the midline, the common swellings are submental lymph nodes, thyroid gland enlargement, thyroglossal cyst, sublingual dermoid, and lipoma. And the second part of the swelling of the neck is the lateral swellings. For benefit of description, lateral swellings can be better described according to their locations of the three triangles of the neck. First is the submandibular triangle, carotid triangle, and third is the posterior triangle. First, submandibular triangle or digastric triangle, and these lateral swellings are enlarged lymph nodes, enlargement of the submandibular cervical glands, deep or plunging ranula, extension of the growth from the jaw, Sjögren's syndrome. Second lateral swelling, the carotid triangle. These swellings are the aneurysm of the carotid artery, carotid body tumor, branchial cyst, branchiogenic carcinoma, thyroid swelling, lymph node swelling, sternomastoid tumor in newborn baby, laryngocele. And third type of the lateral swelling in the neck, that is the posterior triangle, enlarged subclavian lymph nodes, cystic hygroma, pharyngeal pouch, subclavian aneurysm, cervical rift, clavicular tumors, lipoma, Dercum disease, and cold abscesses. In addition to the above list of the following lesions can occur anywhere in the neck, and these are the sebaceous cyst, lipoma, neurofibroma, and hemangioma. Common lateral swellings are lymph node swelling, salivary gland enlargement, thyroid enlargement, branchial cyst, and lipoma. For clinical diagnosis, the swelling of the neck can be divided into acute swelling and chronic swelling. In acute swellings are Ludwig's angina, boil, carbuncle, acute lymphadenitis. These boils, carbuncle, and lymphadenitis we are already seen in our previous surgery lecture. Chronic swellings may be further subdivided into the cystic swelling, solid swelling, and pulsatile swelling. Chronic swellings are three types: cystic, solid, and pulsatile. Cystic swellings are branchial cyst, thyroglossal cyst, dermoid cyst, cystic hygroma, sebaceous cyst, cystic adenoma of the thyroid gland, cold abscess, abscesses of the lymph node, plunging granula, laryngocele, pharyngeal pouch, retention cyst of the salivary gland, solid swelling, swelling arising from the thyroid, swellings arising from the salivary glands, lymph node swelling, branchiogenic carcinoma, sternomastoid tumor, carotid body tumors, and cervical rift. The chronic swelling, that is the third type, is the pulsatile swelling, aneurysm of the carotid artery, aneurysm of the subclavian artery, carotid body tumor, lymph node swelling lying in close proximity to the carotid artery with transmitted pulsation, a few primary toxic goiters. These are the midline and the lateral swellings of the neck. We are very well classified to understand you students. Now the next point of this lecture is the branchial cyst. The development of the branchial cyst. The second arch or the hymoid arch grows ventrally or also caudally, and it grows at the greater pace than the third and the fourth arches. The second arch gradually overlaps over the third and fourth at the end of the fifth week. The ridge produced by this arch grows downwards and meets caudally a smaller bridge termed the epipericardial ridge just above the pericardium. According to some, it meets the fifth arch and the two fuse. A small depression is formed which lies superficial to the third and fourth arches and deep to the second arches. This depression is called precervical sinus. Ultimately, this sinus disappears, but if this sinus persists, it forms a cystic swelling at the upper part of the neck, which is called the branchial cyst. So, in fact, third and fourth arches do not take part in forming the ectodermal coverings of the neck. From the ridge formed by the second branchial arch develops the sternomastoid and the trapezius muscles. If the second arch fails to fuse with the fifth arch and the epicardial ridge, a fistula develops and it connects the precervical sinus. It is called a branchial sinus or branchial fistula. Other theory of branchial cyst is that it may develop from the inclusion of the parotid epithelium in the upper deep cervical lymph nodes, that is the Illingworth. Dear students, here is the image of the branchial cyst. You can see on your screen. This is the another image of the branchial cyst. Now the pathology of the branchial cyst. The cyst is usually lined by the sacrificed squamous epithelium. If it arises from the internal branchial furrow, the epithelium may be columnar or ciliated. The striking features of this cyst is that its wall contains large amount of the lymphoid tissue. For this, the cyst is prone to infection, and this has led to Illingworth's theory of inclusion of the ectopic epithelium in upper deep cervical lymph nodes. The content of the viscid and mucoid tissue material and cholesterol crystals is large numbers. Now the clinical features of the branchial cyst are: first, age. Though the congenital, yet it does not manifest itself before the puberty. Majority of the patients are between 20 to 25 years of and even later. This is because the fluid which is contains takes this time to accumulate. And sex, equal distribution of sex is noticed in such regards in such condition. Now the symptoms: painless swelling in the upper and lateral part of the neck is the main symptom. If infected, the swelling may be painful and it becomes difficult to differentiate from acute lymphadenitis and chronic lymphadenitis or tuberculous lymphadenitis and cold abscess. Now the physical examination site: the branchial cyst occupies the upper and lateral part of the neck deep to the upper third of the sternomastoid muscles. It protrudes from the beneath the anterior border of the sternomastoid. The sternomastoid muscle develops from the migrated myotomes in the ridge of the second branchial arch which cover the precervical sinus. The branchial cyst develops from the precervical sinus, so it will always be deep to the sternomastoid muscles. Now the size and shape: it may be round, but it is usually oval in shape and with its long axis running towards and downwards. It is of variable size and may attain the size of an orange, majority are between 5 to 10 cm in diameter. Now the surface is smooth and the edge is distinct but yield under the palpating fingers. The overlying skin looks normal through it. If infected, may be red and angry looking. Consistency is soft. When the content is under tension, film may be firm or even hard. Fluctuation test will be positive but is difficult to elicit when the cyst is small and the sternomastoid muscle is thick. Transillumination test is usually negative but may be positive if the content is clear fluid, rarely present. Now the mobility: the lump is not freely mobile as it is particularly deep to the sternomastoid. Regional lymph nodes are usually not palpable unless the cyst is infected. The cyst cannot be reduced or compressed. On aspiration, cholesterol crystals can be demonstrated in the aspirated fluid. Students should be remembered that the cyst containing cholesterol crystals are branchial cyst, dental cyst, dentigerous cyst, cystic hygroma, not always, old hydrocele, thyroglossal cyst, not always. This should be remembered by the students. Now the complications of the branchial cyst are: recurrent infection due to the presence of the lymphoid tissues in the wall of the cyst. The cyst may burst, or due to the inadvertent incision, a fistula may develop, which is often called an acquired branchial fistula. Now the treatment is: excision is the treatment of choice. Incision is made parallel to the skin crease along the Langer's line. One must be particular not to leave the behind the portion of the cyst wall. To ensure this, the dissection must be made carefully. Some amount of the content may be aspirated before the dissection so that the wall of the cyst may be grasped with the suitable forceps without injuring it. Sometimes it extends between the origins of the internal and external carotid arises up to the pharyngeal wall. Hypoglossal and glossopharyngeal nerves lies deep to the cyst and they should be protected. The cyst usually lies deep to the posterior belly of the digastric muscle. The spinal accessory nerve also lies deep to the cyst and should be protected. Now the next point of this lecture is the branchial fistula. By the term branchial fistula, we mean congenital branchial fistula develops from the failure of the fusion between the second branchial arch with the fifth. The acquired branchial fistula may occasionally be seen due to the infections of the branchial cyst and subsequent rupture, or due to the inadvertent incision on the infected branchial cyst with the wrong diagnosis of an abscess. It is usually situated in the upper or middle thirds of the neck and often continues to discharge. Dear students, here is a good image on your screen you are watching. There is a branchial fistula, the arrow showing the cutaneous opening of the branchial fistula is clearly seen in this image. Now the congenital branchial fistula is often a branchial sinus without any communication inside. From the development, it is clear that the branchial fistula represents a persistent second branchial cleft which covers the third and fourth branchial arch. So usually there should not be any internal opening, and in the true sense, it is the branchial sinus. The membrane which intervenes between the second branchial cleft and the second branchial pouch, which form the supratonsillar fossa, at times may disappear or perforated by the injudicious use of the probe, and then a branchial sinus becomes a branchial fistula and opens the anterior aspects of the posterior pillar of the fauces just behind the tonsil. Now, the course of the branchial fistula. From its opening on the skin, the fistula passes subcutaneously to the level of the upper border of the thyroid cartilages, where it pierces the deep fascia. The fistula then passes through the bifurcation of the common carotid artery, being superficial to the internal carotid artery and deep to the external carotid artery. As the fistula arises from the second branchial cleft, being covered by the second branchial or arch and superficially, so all the structures derived from the second arch will be superficial to the fistula, and the structures developed from the third branchial arch will lie deep to the fistula. Now the pathology of the branchial fistula is the fistula has muscular coat and an inner epithelial lining. The stratified squamous epithelium or the pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium form the epithelium lining. According to a few pathologists, columnar ciliated epithelium forms the epithelium lining. But since this fistula is the remnant of the branchial cleft, there is a more possibility that the lining will be stratified squamous variety. Patches of lymphoid tissues may be seen deep to the epithelial lining due to the presence of the lymphoid tissue. Recurrent inflammation is common, and not infrequently the epithelial lining is replaced by the chronically inflamed granulation tissue. It often discharges from the external opening either mucoid or mucopurulent fluid. Now the treatment of the branchial fistula. If the fistula becomes troublesome with discharge of mucus and repeated inflammation, the treatment is excision of the fistula tract. A sinogram may be made by the injecting the radio-opaque dye into the fistula's tract to know the upper limit of the fistula. First method, a ureteric catheter may be passed up to the tract, and incision is made high up in the neck along the skin crease, that is the Langer's line, and the dissection is continued to get the upper limit of the tract to the fork of the common carotid artery toward the pharyngeal wall. When the upper dissection is completed, the external orifice is freed by the small elliptical incision on the skin, and whole of the lower part of the tract is dissected out through the upper incision. Both the incisions are now closed. Second method, in the beginning, an elliptical incision is made around the external opening, and the dissection is continued upwards through the superficial fascia and platysma up to the upper border of the thyroid cartilages, where it penetrates through the deep fascia. Gentle traction to the fistula tract will facilitate identification of the fistula and its dissection upwards. A second incision may be required above the upper border of the thyroid cartilage, transversely placed along the Langer's line. The upper part of the tract is dissected through this incision up to the pharyngeal wall. This is the step ladder pattern dissection of the branchial fistula. Both the incisions are closed with or without drainage. During dissection, one must be careful that as many important nerves and blood vessels which has been discussed earlier are around. Complete removal is necessary to avoid the recurrence. Dear students, here is the end of our surgery lecture number 115, that is the knee. Thank you.